In I guess we can get started. So this time I'm not using a mic, I'm just using AirPod. And I use the transparent mode, so I don't have to hold that. Yeah. So I don't have to bring like the dongles to transfer USB-C to USB. That is convenient. Yeah, so only, yeah, again, more students prefer to online class. So anyway, today we are going to talk about heavy metals. So first, I would like to give a brief introduction of the heavy metal, and then I would like to talk about the partitioning of the heavy metal, which is KSP. I think you guys have already deal with it for lab number 7 or for the pipes. And then I will talk about like why do we care about it and the significance and contaminations of the heavy metals. And then I will talk about the source and the regulatory standard of the heavy metals. And then I will briefly talk about the measurement of the metals. And so first, let's look at what is heavy metal and is it heavy? And when I was young, when I see the heavy metal, I think they are very heavy. And actually, the definition is kind of like that. So the heavy metal refers to the density of the pure elements that is greater than 5 grams per cubic centimeter. And the atom mass is usually greater than 20. So based on this definition, we can say that aluminum is not a heavy metal because the atomic weight of aluminum is 18, I think. And so here are some most common toxic heavy metals in the environment, and I just searched the pictures of these heavy metals. So like we have arsenic, and we know that arsenic tritoxide is very, very toxic. And we have the chromium, and I think the chromium dioxide, it looks like the blueberry, something like that, the raisins. And we have the copper, and this is the most commonly copper component, like the basic copper carbonate. And we have lead, which we have been dealing with it for a long time. And we can see the dioxides of lead at different oxidizing states. I think they looks very good. It's like lemonade powder, and this is like strawberry powder, but they are toxic. And we have the cadmium. I didn't find the source of cadmium, but I find that the cadmium has contaminated this river, like in history. And we also have for the chromium, like we have this one and this one and this one. So chromium salt looks very colorful. So I like this color. And we also have the zinc and mercury. For mercury, this is a little bit special because under normal temperature, mercury is a liquid and it can evaporate in the air. So the vapor pressure of mercury is larger than other heavy metals. Let's look at how the heavy metal behave in the environment. So KSP is kind of like a partitioning coefficient. And KSP, the full name of KSP is solubility product constant. So basically, we have the metal. So M here refers to the metal, and A here refers to the base. And in this case, when we dissolve the heavy metal salt in the water, and we know that it will dissociate. And for this chemical reaction, we can write its equilibrium constant, which is the concentration of M, and this should be X times the concentration of A, and this is Y, divided by the concentration of the salt. So traditionally, we have this equilibrium constant, but because this is a solid, and we are looking at the aqueous form, so we can let this equals to 1. So this solid form equals to 1. That's why it becomes this definition. So this is also the definition of solubility product, and this is the equilibrium constant. And because the equilibrium constant refers to the product of the concentration of the ions that are present in a saturated solution, so we need to make the solution saturated, and then we can calculate this constant. Of an iron compound, it is given the name of solubility constant and given the symbol Ksp. But in practice, sometimes we use Ksp, but sometimes we may use log 10 Ksp, and sometimes we use pKsp. And the pKsp equals to it is kind of like the pH. pH refers to the concentration, like the negative log 10 of concentration of H+. So this is negative log 10 of Ksp. So generally we have these three expressions, but they just refers to the same thing. And here shows a common like KSPs for some common salt. And here we can see that from basic chemistry, we know that calcium carbonate, it is insoluble. So we usually use insoluble to describe it, but actually it has KSP. So in this case, when we dissolve calcium carbonate in the water until the water is saturated, the concentration of calcium times the concentration of carbonate equals to 10 to minus 8.48. So we have this relation, and this holds for all of these chemicals. And from this table, we can also see that this is calcium carbonate, and this is magnesium carbonate. We can see that magnesium carbonate is more soluble than calcium carbonate, although this difference is not quite large, but because this is the exponential function, so actually they relatively, like the difference, are relatively large. And so for this one, do you guys have any questions? No? Okay. I don't know if I add some animations, but so next let's look at the influence of pH, because let's just look at these three reactions. We know that aluminum is not a heavy metal, but its environmental behaviors are similar to other metals, so we include it here. For example, for aluminum, we know that when we dissolve the aluminum hydroxide and dissolve in the water, it will dissociate into aluminum 3 plus and 3 hydroxide. And this is similar for chromium and iron. And in this case, we have some questions. First, what happens if we reduce pH, or if the solution becomes more acidic? And in this case, we know that if we reduce pH, it means we have more H plus in the water. On the other hand, we have less OH in the water because the products of H plus and OH minus, they are a constant. And in terms of this equation, if the concentration of OH decrease, which means the reaction will go to right direction, and more aluminum hydroxide will dissolve in the water, so the concentration of aluminum 3 plus will increase. And similarly, if we increase pH, which means we have more OH minus, and the reaction will go to this direction, so we will have less aluminum dissolved in the water. And this is similar for these chemicals. And so it tells us that, mute all. So in this case, we know that if the environments become more acidic, then the heavy metals will, like we have more heavy metals dissolve in the environment. So the acidic environment is usually not good for the heavy metals. But the things can be more complicated. And here I show the illustrative example, and you guys do not have to do the calculation. But I think this is interesting to talk about. So let's just look at aluminum again. So for aluminum, if it is released in the environment or in the soil, it has many adverse impact to the plant. So I'm not going to go through these adverse impact effects one by one, but we know that when the plant uptakes the aluminum, the plant will be in trouble. And we should also know that when the plant uptake the metal ions, we can say like the hydrogen ions are actively transported out of the vacuums of the root cell into the cell, and then the H plus ion displaces mineral from the clay particles, which diffuse into the root. In other words, when the plant uptakes the metal ions, the mechanism is ion exchange. So the plant gives H plus to the soil, and then it uptakes the metal ions into their body, so the charge is balanced. In other words, the plants are very happy to take the cat ions of the metal. So if we have the cat ions in the water, in the soil water solution, the plants are very happy to take. But if we have some metals with no charge, then it is harder for the plant to uptake it. If we know this, we can see that we have aluminum in the water, and actually the aluminum can have different forms because aluminum has 3 charges. It can combine 1 hydroxide, combine 2 hydroxide, 3 hydroxide, 4 hydroxide, and it also has some complex combinations. And for each of these, we have different equilibrium constant. And we can see that all of these equations has OH minus here. And we know that the concentration of OH minus is a function of pH. So we can transform this relation into here. And we can see that these are all the function of pH. This is independent of pH, but it doesn't matter. And this is a log, negative log of the concentration. Is a linear function of pH. We can see that all of these are the linear functions. So by having all of these equations, we can make a plot. And so the plot is like this. So this is a log concentration. So we can see this is a negative. And so we have different species, like this one, this one, this one, this one, blah, blah. And in this case, we can see that as the pH decrease, this one, and this one, and this one, they all increase. In other words, as pH decrease, the aluminum species that has positive charge will increase in general. On the other hand, the aluminum species with negative charge will increase when pH increase. And this is making sense because for the very basic solution, we have so many hydroxide. So the hydroxide are very happy to combine with aluminum that has positively charged. So it will increase. And this curve refers to the total aluminum species in the solution. So this curve is a summation of all of these lines. And from this, we can see that we have a pH that has the lowest concentration of aluminum in the water. But as pH increase or decrease, the aluminum concentration will increase. And in the environment, we know that it is usually something like this, because the environment cannot be very basic because we have CO2 in the atmosphere. And it can be something acidic, but it cannot be very acidic because we have alkalinity in the environment. So, like in about this range, we can see that as pH become more acidic, the concentration of aluminum in the soil solution or in the water will increase, which will generate more risk to the animals or plants in the environment. And actually, we can transfer this plot into the plot on the right side. We can see them together. So this is a percentage of the species. Just recall that when we are learning water chemistry, we have this one. And so this is pH, this is a fraction. And for the carbonate system, recall that this is H2CO3, this is HCO3 minus, and this is CO3 2 minus. So this plot is similar to this one, but because we have many different species, so it will be something like this. And from this plot, we can also see that, like for the neutral condition, something like here, the main species is aluminum hydroxide, which is a solid and non-charged, so which means it is safe for the environment. But as the pH decreases, the percentage of this one decreases, and the percentage of aluminum 3 plus increases, which means we have more aluminum 3 plus in the water solution, which is bad. So again, in general, it tells us that when the environment becomes more acidic, the metal ions will become more available, so it will generate more risk to the environment. So for this one, do you guys have any questions? No? Good. And except for aluminum, like we have some other heavy metals, the real heavy metals, like this is zinc and lead and the copper and the cadmium. And we can see that they have the similar shape. And again, if we focus on the positive charged element, we can see that for all of them, as pH decrease, the concentration of their free iron will increase, which is bad. So again, it tells us that as a pH decrease, they are bad for the environment. But in the real environment, the situation will become more complicated because it has so many different kinds of species. For example, if we have some heavy metals in the environment, it can be a suspension or it can be colloid. And even if it is truly dissolved and dissociated in the water, like it has a free iron, and for each of the heavy metals elements, they may have different oxidizing state. Like for chromium and iron, and I don't remember the name, but this is V. And it can also combine with some to form some inorganic ligands, and it can also combine with some organic functional groups to form the organic metals. We also have some isotopes, but in my experience in the environmental chemistry, we usually do not look at the isotopes, but sometimes we need to care about that. And all of these different speciations will influence the mobility, fate, transportation, and the toxicity of the heavy metal. Here shows some examples, and this is a fate of lead, I think. Yeah, and here the superscript of coal refers to the colloid, and the superscript of MT refers to the mental loceanase. So this is kind of like a organic functional group that can attach to the lead and make it more organic. And we can see that the lead may come from the mining activity, and it may have the form of lead 2+ and the colloid form. And when it's released in the water, it can be stay in the sediment. And in the sediment, the microbials may transfer the lead into the organic form of lead. And this, I would say, this is the most dangerous one because it has a property of organic pollutant. For the organic pollutant, it can be bioaccumulated by the organisms like the fish. So when the human eats the fish, and then the lead will transfer from the environment to the human body, which is very bad. And it's also bad for the fish themselves. Another example is mercury. And again, mercury can form volatile compounds, and it may be released by the plants through the wastewater or through the air exhaust. And when they released in the water, this is similar to the fate of lead. But when it is released in the air, it can transport to remote places. And when the mercury in the water, it can also be transformed into the organic form. This is methane mercury. And this is also kind of like the organic heavy metal. And because it has a property of organic pollutants, it can be uptake by the organisms in the water and the fish, and it is bioaccumulated. So again, when we just get the fish and eat the fish, the humans have a very large risk exposed to the mercury. So I think for some places, like in China, because of the heavy metal pollution, like we are not allowed people to fish in the natural place because we have the risk of these heavy metals. Then let's look at the significance of heavy metal. Like we have already talked about some of the health effects or ecological effects of these heavy metals. And then we will talk more about the effects of these heavy metals in detail. So first, the heavy metals have some adverse effects to the soil health. And the first one is soil acidification. We know that when we have the heavy metal in the water, it can combine the water molecule to form the heavy metal hydroxide and H+. This is because the hydroxides of the heavy metals, they are usually weak base. So they will form. And because they form the weak base, we generate the H+. The H+ can decrease the pH, so the soil or the water will be more acidic. And also, they can reduce in nutrient availability. For example, we have some metals, and we know that the sulfur or phosphate, they are the nutrients for the plant. But the metals can combine with the phosphate of, this is phosphate or phosphate? I just confused. So this phosphate? Sulfur. Yeah, sulfur, yeah. To form the precipitation which has no charge. And it can also combine with the phosphate to form the solid with no charge. And they are very not available to the plant, so the nutrients will decrease. Also, they can inhibit the soil microbial activities. And on the right side shows some more detailed mechanism. So we can see that, so first, the heavy metals can damage DNA. Also, they can inhibit the description process from DNA to mRNA, which is bad. And on the other hand, the heavy metals can inhibit the transcription process when the cells are synthesizing the proteins. And on the other hand, the heavy metals can denaturate the protein, which means it can destroy the structure of the proteins. And similarly, because most of the enzymes are the proteins, so the activity of the enzymes will be inhibited. Also, they can destroy or have some damages to the cell membrane and to inhibit the cell division. And so for this one, do you guys have any questions? No? And the next one is the effect of heavy metals on the plant and crop production. And here shows some mechanisms of the heavy metal to the plant. I'm not going to read through this, but here are some general points. So it can reduce the seed germination and can reduce plant growth, reduce plant weight, and a decrease of the photosynthesis. And it can also be accumulated in the edible part, which is bad for humans. And also, when the wild animal eats this plant, it may be accumulated by the animals. And here shows a picture of Maria's experiment. So I'm not sure if Maria has talked about her research, but as far as I know, one of her research is to look at the influence of lead to the germination of the plant. And this is a picture of her growth chamber experiment. We can see that she has different plant species, like the common plant species, and then she adds different concentration of lead solution in each of the plate, and then she will measure the weight difference. I'm not sure if she gets the result, but I think it looks cute, so I took the picture of it. And then we have the effect on the surface of groundwater. And here are some points. Like the most common mental pollution in freshwater comes from mining companies, because the mining will destroy many of the rocks that has the heavy metals. And metals remains in the sediment for a long time because they are not biodegradable. And when we have the mining water here, it will be something like this. And I think the color looks good, but generally they are toxic, so not good. And with the low pH, metals are in ionic form, and they are more mobile and toxic. So we have discussed this before. And for the metals can enter food chain through the vertebrates and fish, especially when the metals are in the organic form. They are more risky. And another way of water pollution is lead pipes. Like humans can uptake lead through the drinking water. And I think we are going to talk about this in the Thursday lecture. We also have some effect pollution in the air. So, due mostly to industrial activities, the power plants, waste incinerations, and mining, so they can generate air pollutant that has the heavy metals. And the heavy metals can transboundary air pollution, especially of lead, mercury, and cadmium can affect most of the remote regions. So basically, for the air plants, like when they are burning the fuel, the heavy metal particles, like in the salt form, they can be just released in the air. On the other hand, we may have some small metal particles, but like we have PM 2.5, and these metal particles can attach to the surface of PM2.5, and then one human can breathe the PM2.5. In other words, the PM2.5, it may contain different kinds of heavy metals because of the attachment. And this PM2.5 or these small particles, they can just go with the air to go to some further places. And I will talk about the diffusion of the air pollutant in the next unit. And heavy metals in the air can deposit over plant soil and water, entering the food chain through the plants or crops and fish. So they will finally be like deposit with the rain or just by the gravity, and then they will contaminate the place under their traveling path. And also heavy metals can also be inhaled by humans, like when they are released in the environment. And for US EPA, like this is a national air quality standard. And we can see that for the EPA's national air quality standards, we have different contaminants. So these are the contents for the air pollution lecture, but here I want to emphasize that we have the lead here. So among all of the heavy metals, we have the lead in this standard, which means in the United States, the lead pollution is like the lead air pollution is the most important one. And finally, like we have the heavy metals to humans. And here is a table that summarizes these common heavy metals and their adverse effect to human health. I'm not going to rate them one by one, but I think after class you guys can rate that. I think this is useful because like sometimes when we have some symposium or our friends have some symposium, we may just guess what's the cause of that, or sometimes we may just prevent from being exposed to these heavy metals. And so I'm not going to rate them one by one, so you guys can read it after class. So far, do you guys have any questions? No? Okay. And then we are going to talk about the source of heavy metals. And this picture shows the eruption of the volcano. And actually, this is one of the source of the heavy metals. And the heavy metals will be released with the magma. And this is one of the natural source of the heavy metal. And another natural source of heavy metal is weathering. So in general, naturally we have two sources. We mainly have two sources of heavy metals, which is volcanic eruption and the weathering. But for anthropogenic sources, like we have so many sources, like the smelters, waste incinerator, power plants, fertilizer, and industrial sludge, exhaust gas, livestock manure, and like urban industrial effluents, wastewater, pesticide use, and like the deterioration of the sewage pipes. But here I want to emphasize, usually like the most commonly heavy metal sources are the mining and urban runoff. And then we can talk about like how much heavy metals are allowed in the environment or for our human health. And this picture shows the regulatory standards of heavy metal in agricultural soil. So this is agricultural soil, that's the soil everywhere. And we can see that they are of different countries. And when I saw this table, I just find that, for example, for zinc, we can see like in this country, Tanzania, the zinc, the standard is relatively low, but in United States, the standard is relatively high. So actually at that time, I have the question, like, do you think why different countries have different standards? Yes?
Perhaps due to like their primary export, like crops of primary export, certain crops might be more susceptible to like, let's say, infiltrating into like the edible portions of the plant.
Mm-hmm.
And so like corn might be less vulnerable to zinc versus whatever Tanzania might export.
Oh yeah, I think that's a good
I feel
explanation.
like locational, like the climate's different in all these different countries, so there might be like a different like reaction to that.
Oh, so they have different climates, so the climate may influence the uptake of the heavy metals. Yeah. So do you guys, if you guys have any possible answers, you can type in the chat. And for me, I think I agree with your guys' explanation, and I also have another aspect that I'm not sure it is correct, but maybe like in Tanzania, when the people in the environment, they have more exposure to zinc from the environment, maybe when they are in the room, and the room, like the material has more zinc. So on the other words, they have less limit to the food from the soil. Let me see. Maybe different countries' rate shows that chemicals are different level. Yeah, I think this could also be, and since these are agricultural soil, different countries produce different agricultural output. Yeah, I think this is similar to yours.
I don't know, it's really politics. Like you make, like say Germany makes like a lot of money off of something that produces arsenic, so they like increase the standards so they can produce more.
Oh yeah, I think that's also like the economical aspect. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and yeah, for me, like maybe in the USA, because the environment that we are living here, we have less exposure to zinc from our environment. So it is okay to expose more zinc from the food. But I'm not sure what's the correct answer, but I agree with your guys' explanations. Okay, anyway, but we can see that the standards are very different among countries, and we can see the difference could be very large. Okay, and again, we have looked at this table before, but we can see for the ecological risk assessment and for the soil screening level, we can see that most of these chemicals are heavy metals. Like we have a little bit pesticides, but most of them are metals and heavy metals. Here is the standard of in the permeable concentration in the natural waters, and we can see like for the lead, this is 5, and we have some others. And we also have the standards for the drinking water. So the drinking water is a little bit different from the natural water. And again, so this is not for heavy metal, it has some other metals. But again, for the lead, this is like this. So I'm not sure if you guys will compare the lead concentration in your experiment to the standards, but I think it could be useful. And finally, when we have the metals or heavy metals in the sample, how can we analyze the concentration of the metals? And so for the measuring technologies, like we have atomic spectroscopy, and we also have this inductively coupled plasma mass spectroscopy, which is called ICP-MS. And I think in lab number 7, you guys will use this instrument to measure the concentration of the lead. We also have like the neutron activation analysis. I'm not sure what is this, so I did some search, And so it is kind of like we use the neutron to activate the atom, and then the atom will generate like the gamma radiation, and then we can relate the intensity of the gamma radiation and the concentration or the species of the heavy metals. And we also have like X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy and some other electroanalytical methods. So I think these methods are a little bit abstract for us because we haven't used them before. But I think in future, when we got a chance to use some of these instruments, it will be more concrete. But before the measurement, we need to do separation and extraction. For the separation, we have the chromatography, which we have discussed, similar to the organic chemistry. And we also have the capillary electrophoresis. I also did some search of this one. So basically, we can use the the voltage power to two solutions. And because of the electrical fields, like the metal irons, they will just move through this bridge. And then we can have a detector here to detect the concentration. We also have some iron chromatography. LL extraction refers to the liquid extraction. And we also have some like iron exchange and core precipitation. So for this one, do you guys have questions? No? And I think that's it for today. So we have some time to review what we have learned. So in this case, most common toxic heavy metals in the environment are lead, yes, arsenic, copper, cadmium, chromium, mercury, yes, Hg. Zinc, yeah. And so solubility products, mercury, yes. Solubility product constant is defined as, so we need to give the chemical equation, but it is basically like, this is X, this is Y minus, this is X plus. And mercury can form what? Which is very mobile and bioaccumulative. Excuse me?
Like gas vapor.
But gas vapor is not bioaccumulative. Excuse me? Yes. So HgCH3 or CH3 or CH4, but this is methyl mercury. And heavy metals can cause soil acidification, and it can combine sulfur and phosphate, right? So they will become less available. And the phosphate and sulfur, they are nutrients. So, and the reduction of nutrients. And in the environment, metals are usually more mobile and toxic at lower pH, yes. But again, we need to emphasize that it is in the environment. And the natural sources of heavy metals include volcano eruption and weathering. And the common anthropogenic sources of heavy metals include mining, yes. Mining and urban runoff, right? And how heavy metals are allowed. So this is case by case. And finally, the full name of ICP is yes, inductively coupled, yes, plasma. And so basically in this case, we have the samples emitted in the air or in the chamber, and then we have the plasma, and we have some like, no. We have the sample from here, and we have some inductive structures here, and then the samples will become plasma, and then we use the light to emit it, then it will have some other lights. I think Maria will talk about this more. Okay, anyway, so the measurements of ICP is watts of speciation. I haven't talked about this before, but this is independent. And so this means that no matter like if we have PbO2 or PbO4 or like H or any of the Pb the lead compounds, it doesn't matter. We just measure the concentration of Pb in the solution. So it is independent of speciation. And keep. And that's it for today. And I just want to say that quiz 8 and assignment 6 are due on Friday, which is next Friday. Yes. And for assignment 6, we have 5 questions in total. For the first 2 questions, they are compulsory, so we must do these 2 questions. But for the last 3 questions, we only need to choose 2 questions to finish. So in other words, we only have to, like the sigma number of questions is 4. So even though we have 5 questions here, but we only need to finish 4 questions. And also on Thursday, we have the Lecture-15, which is blind case study. So Maria will not give the online lecture, but she made a pre-recorded lecture. So on Thursday, we will have no class, but you guys may use this time to watch the video of this. And that's it.